First species counterpoint. The primary purpose of species counterpoint is to compose a second melody that is independent and distinct from the cantus firmus. In first species counterpoint, there is one note of counterpoint for every note of cantus firmus. The cantus firmus is labeled CF, and the counterpoint is written either above or below the cantus firmus. First species rule number 1, the counterpoint must begin on the fifth or octave when the counterpoint is above. In this case, the counterpoint is written an octave above the cantus firmus, or it could begin on the D above. Rule number 2, the counterpoint must begin on the unison or octave when the counterpoint is below. With this cantus firmus, we could start the counterpoint below at a unison G or a G an octave below. You may never begin a fifth below the cantus firmus. First species counterpoint rule number 3, the counterpoint must end leading tone tonic. As you can see, scale degree 7, scale degree 8. And the counterpoint always ends leading tone tonic, whether it is above or below the cantus firmus. First species counterpoint rule number 4. Chromatic alterations of scale degrees 6 and 7 are allowed in the counterpoint in minor keys only. Think melodic minor. In this example, scale degree 6 in G minor has been raised to E natural to avoid the tritone leap of E flat to E natural. This would be considered a dissonant melodic interval as E flat, but raising to E natural makes this a perfect fourth and a consonant melodic interval. Also note that scale degree 7 at the end is raised to the leading tone because you must always end leading tone tonic whether you are in major or minor. So in every minor counterpoint example, the counterpoint will be raised in the second to last or penultimate measure. First species counterpoint rule number 5, consonant harmonic intervals only. You'll notice that the intervals formed between the counterpoint and the cantus firmus are all consonant melodic intervals. Perfect octave, major or minor third, major or minor sixth, perfect fifth, and the perfect unison is acceptable in some places. There are no seconds, no fourths, no sevenths, and no augmented or diminished harmonic intervals. It is also important to note that primarily thirds and sixths are the intervals used in first species counterpoint. The octave and the fifth, and perhaps the unison, are used sparingly. First species rule number 6. Unisons may occur only in the first or last measures. They may never be used internally. First species rule number 7. No more than 3 consecutive parallel thirds or sixths. As you can see, here are 2 thirds in a row, followed by a 6, followed by 2 thirds. Here we have 2/3, again followed by a third, so there would be considered 3/3 in a row. And here we have 3/6 in a row. 3/6 or 3/3 is okay, 4 in a row is not. Rule number 8, you may tie twice, but never the same note twice in the counterpoint. This E has been tied, that would be considered one tie. Therefore, one more note could be tied in the counterpoint as long as it was not E. Rule number 9, there can be as much as a 1/10 distance or interval between the counterpoint and the cantus firmus. Here we have a 1/10. When the counterpoint is below, we will extend that to a 1/13, but in general, try to keep the two voices a 1/10 apart. First species rule number 10, no simultaneous high points. The high point in the cantus firmus and the high point in the counterpoint may not occur at the same time, in this case in the same measure. So the high point for the cantus firmus is here in measure 8. The high point for the counterpoint is in measure 10. One thing to note, that it is possible to have the high point in the first or the last measure. It does not have to be somewhere in the middle. It can begin on the high point or it may end on the high point. First species rule number 11, no parallel or hidden fifths or octaves. Parallel fifths and octaves are very easy to identify. Anytime you have 2/5 in a row or 2/8 in a row, that is parallel fifths or parallel octaves, and wrong. Hidden fifths or octaves are a little bit harder to see. One must remember the concept of similar motion. Two voices that move in the same direction but by different amounts. So from measure 5 to measure 6 is a hidden fifth because both voices move up to the fifth. And in measure 12 to 13, there are hidden octaves because both voices move down to the octave. The only way to avoid hidden fifths is to always approach a fifth or an octave with contrary motion or the opposite direction. Counterpoint rule number 12, no overlaps, voice crossings, or cross relations. As in 4-part voice leading, an overlap occurs when one part goes above or below the previous note in the other voice. So this C goes above that B flat, therefore this C overlaps that B flat. A voice crossing is essentially a double overlap, where one note goes below, the other note goes above. And so we have a voice cross here. A cross relation occurs when two forms of the same note are in adjacent measures. Therefore, cross relations can only occur in minor keys. So we have an E natural in this measure and an E flat in this measure, and that is considered a cross relation and not allowed. First species rule number 13, It is best to avoid simultaneous leaps in both voices. When one has to leap, it's always best if the other voice moves by step, as in measure 7 and 8, and in measure 10 and 11.